Hey everyone, welcome back to the Checkered Sky channel where we dive into true crime stories. Today, we're diving into 5 real-life true crime cases, each grabbing the attention of the public and media. While investigating these 5 cases, detectives faced challenges. However, evidence, witness statements, and in some cases, surveillance footage ultimately helped uncover the truth. Today, we're diving into a case that shook a small community in Washington state. A story of a young woman with big dreams, a night that went terribly wrong, and a mother's desperate search for answers. This is the story of Alyssa May Noceda. On February 3, 2018, Alyssa Noceda, an 18-year-old from Everett, Washington, kissed her mom goodbye and headed out to a party. That night, Alyssa packed a bag with extra clothes, a sign she planned to stay over after the party. It was at a mobile home near Martha Lake, just a short drive from her home in Everett. Parties like this weren't unusual for Alyssa. She loved hanging out with friends, catching up, and just being 18. Her mom, Gina, knew she was headed out for the night and trusted her to stay safe. Alyssa was responsible, always checking in. But as the hours ticked by, something felt off. By February 5th, Gina hadn't heard from Alyssa. No texts, no calls, no sign of her since 8 p.m. on February 3rd. For a mom who described her daughter as someone who'd always keep in touch, this silence was deafening. Alyssa wasn't the type to just vanish. Gina's worry grew into panic. She took to Facebook, posting a desperate message. "I haven't seen or heard from my daughter since Saturday night. If anyone knows anything, please contact me." That post, made on February 5, 2018, was a cry for help, a mother's plea to find her child. What happened at that party? Why wasn't Alyssa answering? The mobile home near Martha Lake held the answers, but for now, all Gina had was fear and a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. Alyssa's disappearance wasn't just a mystery, it was the start of a nightmare that would unravel a devastating truth. Alyssa was born August 25, 1999, in Everett, Washington, a working-class city about 25 miles north of Seattle. As the firstborn child of her mother, Gina Pearson, Alyssa grew up with a younger sister, who was just 7 years old in 2018. Gina described Alyssa as outgoing, smart, and determined, a young woman with a vibrant personality who made friends easily. Alyssa attended Mariner High School in Everett, a public school known for its diverse student body. But like many teenagers, her path wasn't perfectly linear. Around 2016 or 2017, Alyssa took a break from high school for about a year. Instead of sitting idle, she got a job at a pizza restaurant on Whidbey Island, a scenic spot across Puget Sound from Everett. The job wasn't easy. She had to commute by ferry from Mukilteo, a trip that could take over an hour each way, depending on the schedule. It was a grind, but Alyssa stuck with it, showing her work ethic and independence. That job was more than just a paycheck for Alyssa. It was a step toward figuring out her future. According to her mom, Alyssa was proud of the responsibility and the chance to earn her own money. She'd always been close to her family, especially her little sister, and she wanted to set a good example. Gina often spoke of Alyssa's determination, noting how she balanced work with her plans to return to school. In early 2018, Alyssa had started gathering paperwork to re-enroll at Mariner High School. Her goal? To graduate alongside her friends, a milestone she was excited to reach. Outside of work and school, Alyssa was a typical 18-year-old. She loved hanging out with friends, whether it was catching up over food or just chilling together. Everett was her home base, a place where she felt comfortable navigating the local scene. Coffee shops, parks, and the occasional party. Alyssa wasn't perfect, but she had a drive to keep moving forward, whether it was through her job, her plans for school, or her relationships with family and friends. On the evening of February 3, 2018, Alyssa was getting ready to head out. That day, she told her mom, Gina, she was going to a party at a mobile home in the 400 block of Lakeview Road, near Martha Lake, just a few miles from home. For her, this was just another weekend hangout, nothing out of the ordinary. She yelled out to her family, saying she loved them, before heading out the door, as Gina later recalled. It was a small moment, but one her mom would hold on to later. Martha Lake is a quiet, suburban area in Linwood, about 15 miles north of Seattle. The mobile home park where the party took place was typical for the area: tightly packed homes, families, and young people living side by side. The party was at a residence in this neighborhood, a spot where local teens and young adults often gathered. Alyssa knew people there, felt comfortable enough to bring an overnight bag, and likely expected a night of music, conversation, and maybe some drinks. Parties like this weren't uncommon for her crowd, friends catching up, some letting loose after a long week. What we know about that night comes from court records and police reports. Alyssa arrived at the mobile home, joining a group of young people. The atmosphere was casual, the kind of gathering where music played and conversations flowed. But like many parties, there were prohibited substances circulating. Court documents note that Alyssa spent time in a bedroom at the residence, hanging out with others. What exactly happened in that room would later become a focal point of the investigation, but at this stage, all we know is that Alyssa was there, socializing, and part of the scene. She was last seen by friends at the party, but as the night wore on, something went wrong. The next morning on February 4th, she wasn't answering her phone, which was unusual for someone who typically stayed in touch with her mom. Gina later told reporters she had a bad feeling when Alyssa left that night, but didn't act on it. Alyssa's friends, too, lost track of her. No one could say exactly when or why she stopped engaging with the group. By February 5th, when Gina hadn't heard from Alyssa for nearly 2 days, she took to Facebook, posting a desperate plea. "I haven't seen or heard from my daughter since 8 p.m. on Saturday." That post, shared with friends and family, was a sign of how serious things were getting. Alyssa's silence wasn't just out of character, it was alarming. Her younger sister, her mom, and her friends were left wondering where she could be. Had she decided to crash somewhere else? Was she okay? The answers were still hidden in that mobile home near Martha Lake. Friends who'd been at the party were questioned informally by Gina and others, but no one could pinpoint exactly when Alyssa was last seen or if she'd left the mobile home. The lack of answers pushed Gina to contact the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office, turning her personal search into an official missing persons case. Police began their investigation by focusing on the last place Alyssa was known to be, the mobile home on Lakeview Road. According to court documents, detectives interviewed people who attended the party, trying to piece together a timeline of Alyssa's movements. Early on, the trail was murky. Partygoers gave vague or conflicting accounts, and no one could confirm if Alyssa had left the residence or stayed behind. The investigation took a critical turn when police received a tip. Court records show that someone who'd heard details about the party contacted authorities, raising concerns about what might have happened to Alyssa. The tip pointed detectives back to the mobile home, suggesting that the answers to Alyssa's disappearance were still inside. On February 8, 2018, just 5 days after Alyssa was last seen, police returned to the residence with a warrant. What they found there changed the case from a missing persons report to something far more serious. Alyssa's body was discovered in the residence, hidden in a plastic crate in a bedroom. The discovery was shattering. A young woman who'd left home for a night with friends was gone. The mobile home, once a casual party spot, was now a crime scene, and the investigation shifted from finding Alyssa to understanding how she died. Detectives began processing the scene meticulously. Court records detail how police collected physical evidence from the bedroom where Alyssa was found, including items that could shed light on the events of February 3rd. The Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office was called in to determine the cause of death, a critical step in unraveling the case. On April 17, 2018, the medical examiner released their findings. Alyssa's death was ruled accidental, caused by an overdose from a combination of 2 prohibited substances. The report didn't point to foul play in the overdose itself, but the circumstances surrounding her death raised serious questions. The evidence pointed to a tragic sequence of events. Alyssa had been at the party, socializing in a bedroom with others, when she consumed prohibited substances. According to court documents, she collapsed shortly after. What happened next, or didn't happen, would become a focal point for investigators. Police began to suspect that someone at the party knew more about Alyssa's collapse than they were letting on. The investigation zeroed in on one individual, whose actions in the hours after Alyssa's collapse were now under scrutiny. For Alyssa's family, the news of her death was unbearable. Gina Pearson, who'd been searching tirelessly since Alyssa's disappearance, was devastated. In interviews with the Everett Herald, Gina expressed her grief, describing Alyssa as a vibrant, determined young woman who deserved so much more. Her aunt, Rochelle Palmer, spoke of the family's shock, struggling to process how a night out could end in such tragedy. Alyssa's 7-year-old sister was left without her big sister, a loss that hit the family hard. Gina told reporters she felt a mix of sorrow and anger, wanting answers about what happened in that mobile home and why no one helped her daughter. Gina Pearson was 16 when she became pregnant with Alyssa. There are parallels between Alyssa's youth and her own. "She kind of saw what I went through," Gina said. "So I got kicked out of Mariner, and I had to go to an alternative school. I had a lot going on and ended up dropping out. I think she tried to use that as an excuse." As police continued their work, the investigation uncovered troubling details about the hours after Alyssa's collapse. Court records hint at actions taken, or not taken, that could have changed the outcome. On February 8, 2018, Snohomish County Sheriff's deputies arrested 19-year-old Brian Varela at his mobile home in the 400 block of Lakeview Road, Linwood, after a co-worker reported his actions to police. Alyssa collapsed in Varela's bedroom during a party on February 3, 2018, after consuming prohibited substances. According to court documents reported by the Everett Herald, Alyssa lost consciousness within a minute of taking the substances. Varela, instead of calling 911, took semi-nude photos of her, texting them to friends with the message, "I think she OD'd, still breathing." He admitted to raping her while she was unconscious, later telling police he did it to pass the time. He searched online for what to do if someone overdoses, but ignored advice to seek help. By the morning of February 4th, Varela woke to find Alyssa dead, her lips blue and body cold. He showed her body to his roommate, who urged him to call police, but Varela refused. He went to work a double shift at Dairy Queen, where he boasted to a co-worker about the incident, saying Alyssa died having sex with me, and admitting he wasn't sure if she was alive during the assault, according to court records. Varela used Alyssa's thumb to unlock her iPhone, posting, "I'm out, bye," on her Snapchat to suggest she'd run away. He washed her body to remove DNA evidence, broke her leg to fit her into a plastic crate obtained from his mother's nearby home, and planned to bury her near Marysville with onions to mask the odor, intending to flee to Mexico. The co-worker, after seeing Gina Pearson's Facebook post about Alyssa's disappearance, alerted police, leading to Varela's arrest and the discovery of Alyssa's body on February 8 during a search of the mobile home. The judicial process unfolded in Snohomish County Superior Court. Varela was charged on February 9, 2018, with first-degree manslaughter, second-degree rape, and controlled substance homicide, with bail set at $500,000. Court records highlight the prosecution's challenge. Washington law didn't criminalize failing to seek help for an overdose unless the victim was a child, elderly, or pregnant, making first-degree manslaughter hard to prove. Proving second-degree rape was also difficult due to legal definitions around consent and unconsciousness. On September 20, 2018, Varela pleaded guilty to reduced charges in a plea deal: second-degree manslaughter, third-degree rape, and unlawful disposal of remains, a misdemeanor. Deputy Prosecutor Tony Montgomery explained to the Everett Herald that the deal ensured a conviction, as a trial risked acquittal on the original charges due to legal constraints. The sentencing hearing on November 15, 2018, was emotional. Alyssa's family and friends filled the courtroom, many wearing "Justice for Alyssa" hoodies, with some featuring her image and angel wings. Gina Pearson, Alyssa's mother, spoke tearfully, calling the plea deal a slap on the wrist, and Varela's actions heartless. One friend, Catherine Koziol, pointed out there were other young men who saw those photos of Alyssa dying. They had cracked sickening jokes too, but they were not facing any punishment for failing to call for help, she said. Varela's defense argued for leniency, citing his lack of prior criminal history and his guilty plea as evidence of remorse. Varela spoke briefly. "I'm sorry for my foolish actions. Whatever I get is what I deserve," as noted in court records. Prosecutors pushed for the maximum sentence, with Deputy Prosecutor Tony Montgomery condemning Varela's complete disregard for Alyssa's life. Superior Court Judge Linda Creasy expressed frustration, telling the court she was surprised, even outraged, that the maximum penalty for someone with no record was 34 months. She noted that some auto theft cases carried harsher sentences. On November 15, 2018, Superior Court Judge Linda Creasy sentenced Varela to 34 months in prison, 2 years and 10 months, the maximum allowed. And I certainly can understand why the family and friends of the victim feel surprised and even outraged by the sentence that's provided here. The behavior, Mr. Varela, you described as foolish, I think that would be a gross understatement, Judge said. The behavior that I see described here is appalling. And I think one of the reasons that the law doesn't really seem to adequately address what happened here is that, frankly, it is so beyond the pale, I'm not sure that the legislature really contemplated something like this. The sentence marked the end of the legal proceedings, but for Alyssa's family, it fell far short of justice. "It's a joke," Alyssa's mother, Gina Pearson, said. "Usually people who do stuff like this don't get away with a slap on the wrist." Outside the courtroom, the community's reaction echoed the family's frustration. News reports from the Everett Herald noted that friends and neighbors were stunned by the short sentence, given the details of the case. Alyssa was remembered as a local girl who worked hard at a pizza restaurant on Whidbey Island and dreamed of a brighter future. The outcome sparked conversations about the dangers of prohibited substances and the need for legal reforms. Gina Pearson vowed to take action, telling Como News she planned to push for changes in Washington's laws to hold people accountable for failing to seek help in overdose cases. Her advocacy was driven by a desire to prevent other families from experiencing the same heartbreak. This tragedy highlighted how quickly a night out could turn deadly. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Drop your thoughts in the comments, like, and subscribe for more true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe and take care. Today we're diving into a case that shook a small Australian community to its core. A case filled with heartbreak, unanswered questions, and a desperate search for justice. It was March 25, 2022, in Mayfield, a quiet suburb of Newcastle, Australia. 21-year-old Mackenzie Anderson, known to her friends as Max, was at home in her modest apartment on Crebert Street. She was a young mother, her life revolving around her 23-month-old son. Around 10:40 p.m., a frantic call reached the local police. A neighbor, startled by screams, reported a disturbance at Mackenzie's unit. The police rushed to the scene. When they arrived at the Crebert Street apartment, they found a horrific sight. This case isn't just about a single night. It's about a system, a relationship, and a series of failures that led to an unthinkable outcome. As investigators began piecing together the days leading up to that fateful night, they turned to Mackenzie's life, her dreams, her struggles, and the relationships that shaped her world, to understand how things went so wrong. Born and raised in Newcastle, New South Wales, Mackenzie grew up in a close-knit family. Her mother, Tabitha Ackritt, a dental hygienist, was a pillar of support, and their bond was evident in the heartfelt tributes Tabitha later shared. Mackenzie was also close to her stepfather and friends, who described her as the heart of their circle. She had a knack for making people laugh, often sharing snippets of her life on social media, where her TikTok videos captured her humor and strength as a young mother. Her 23-month-old son was her world, and she poured her energy into creating a stable life for him, despite the hardships she faced. Mackenzie's life hadn't been easy. By her early 20s, she was navigating the challenges of single motherhood while living in a modest unit on Crebert Street. Friends said she was determined to break free from a cycle of hardship, working to provide for her son and dreaming of a brighter future. Her relationship with Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, cast a long shadow over her life. The two began dating in late 2019, and their on-again, off-again relationship was marked by turbulence. By October 2021, Thompson had been jailed for assaulting Mackenzie, intimidating her, and damaging her property. He served a short sentence with a non-parole period of just over 4 months and was released on March 9, 2022. An apprehended violence order was in place, meant to keep Thompson away from Mackenzie, prohibiting any contact or visits to her home. But Mackenzie's friends later revealed she lived in constant fear, convinced Thompson would come after her once he was free. She messaged a friend, saying, "My ex Tyrone just got out of jail from what he did to me and is still being weird and harassing me. He couldn't last 24 hours." Despite the AVO, Thompson reached out to Mackenzie almost immediately after his release, calling her and sending messages from multiple social media accounts. Friends said Mackenzie felt trapped, torn between fear and the hope that things might stabilize. One heartbreaking detail emerged later. Mackenzie had asked for a new set of knives for Christmas 2021, a practical gift for her home. Those same knives would later become part of the tragedy. The night of March 25, 2022, started like any other in the quiet suburb of Mayfield. But beneath the surface of this ordinary night, a tragedy was unfolding, one that would leave a community in shock and a family shattered. Mackenzie's apartment on Crebert Street was a small, unassuming unit in a block of flats, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by sight, if not by name. That evening, she wasn't alone. A male friend, whose identity was closely guarded in early reports, was with her, along with her 23-month-old son, who was likely asleep in his crib. Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, was also present at some point during the night, despite the apprehended violence order that barred him from contacting her or visiting her home. The details of how Thompson ended up at her apartment remain murky, but court records later revealed that he had been asked to leave multiple times that evening. His refusal to comply set the stage for what would become a devastating confrontation. Alarmed, the neighbor dialed emergency services, describing a scene that sounded dire: a woman's voice in distress, a man's voice shouting, and the unmistakable sense that something was terribly wrong. The exact words of the call weren't made public, but the urgency was clear enough to prompt an immediate response from the Newcastle City Police District. When police arrived at the apartment block, they were met with a harrowing sight. Mackenzie lay lifeless on the veranda outside her unit, her body surrounded by blood. The scene was chaotic, with paramedics soon joining the officers in a frantic attempt to save her. Despite their efforts, Mackenzie was pronounced dead at the scene, her injuries too severe to overcome. Her toddler son, found inside the apartment, was mercifully unharmed. Local Commander Superintendent Wayne Humphrey later described the scene as horrendous. The police found a man at the scene, later identified as Tyrone Thompson, sitting cross-legged at the top of the communal stairs, his hand bloodied and injured. He was loud, demanding medical attention for his wound, even as officers focused on the grim task at hand. A broken knife handle and blade were found near Mackenzie, stark evidence of the brutality that had unfolded. Thompson was arrested and taken to John Hunter Hospital under police guard for treatment of his injury, which raised immediate questions about his role in the events. What preceded this tragedy was a series of events that had been building for weeks. After his release from prison on March 9, 2022, Thompson wasted no time breaching the AVO. He began contacting Mackenzie, calling her, messaging her from multiple social media accounts, and even reaching out to people close to her new partner. Court documents later revealed that Mackenzie had spent much of the previous 6 days with Thompson, despite her fear of him. Friends said she felt trapped, unsure how to break free from his persistent attempts to reconnect. That night, a gathering at her apartment included Thompson and her male friend, though the exact dynamics remain unclear. What is known is that tensions escalated. The male friend, who had left earlier in the evening, returned to check on her, only to witness a horrific scene. Thompson standing over Mackenzie, who was already on the ground. Investigators later learned that Mackenzie had been trying to protect herself in the weeks leading up to that night. She had reached out to domestic violence advocacy groups, emailing them to request help with security measures like cameras and reinforced doors. The night of March 25th wasn't a sudden explosion of violence, but the culmination of a pattern of control and intimidation. Thompson had been jailed in October 2021 for assaulting Mackenzie, intimidating her, and damaging her property, yet the system allowed him back into her life just 16 days before her death. The AVO, meant to be her shield, was little more than a piece of paper. As the initial shock settled, the Newcastle City Police District, under the banner of Strike Force Slant, launched a meticulous investigation to uncover what had happened in those chaotic final moments. The investigation began with the crime scene itself. Detectives meticulously combed through Mackenzie's apartment, cataloging every detail. The veranda where her body was found was a focal point, marked by bloodstains and the shattered remnants of a knife. Forensic teams collected the fragments, knowing they could hold critical clues about the weapon and its wielder. Inside the apartment, officers found signs of a disturbance: overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and traces of blood that hinted at a confrontation that had moved from inside to the veranda. Digital evidence became a cornerstone of the investigation. Mackenzie's phone and social media accounts revealed a trail of fear and desperation. Investigators found messages between Mackenzie and Thompson, showing they had been in contact since his release. Some exchanges were tense, others oddly amicable, suggesting a complex dynamic. Thompson had also messaged people close to Mackenzie's new partner, attempting to gather information or assert control. These communications, pulled from servers and cross-referenced with phone records, showed he had breached the AVO multiple times, contacting her through calls and multiple social media accounts. Detectives also explored Mackenzie's broader relationships. They interviewed her mother, Tabitha Ackert, who shared her daughter's fears about Thompson. In a statement to the court, later reported by the Newcastle Herald, Tabitha said, "Mackenzie lived in constant fear after Tyrone's release. She told me he wouldn't let her go." Friends echoed this, describing how Mackenzie had confided about Thompson's persistent attempts to reconnect. One friend told police, "She wanted to protect her son, but she felt trapped, like there was no way out." During police questioning, Thompson's statements were guarded but revealing. According to court reports later cited by the Newcastle Herald, he claimed the incident was a chaotic misunderstanding. He admitted to being at Mackenzie's apartment that night, despite the AVO, but insisted he had been invited. He described an argument that escalated, alleging that Mackenzie had been the aggressor, wielding a knife in a heated moment. His account painted a picture of self-defense, claiming his hand injury came from trying to disarm her. "She came at me, and I just reacted," he reportedly told detectives, though his story shifted under scrutiny, with inconsistencies about the sequence of events. He denied any intent to harm her, but his explanation struggled to align with the physical evidence: the broken knife, Mackenzie's fatal injuries, and witness accounts of her desperation to escape. Detectives pressed Thompson on his actions in the days leading up to the incident. They confronted him with evidence of his repeated AVO breaches, including messages and calls to Mackenzie and her associates. Thompson downplayed these, saying he was trying to sort things out and maintain a connection for the sake of their shared history. But Mackenzie's emails to advocacy groups, expressing fear that he would come for her, contradicted his narrative. The police also examined Thompson's interactions with Mackenzie's male friend, who was present earlier that evening, probing whether jealousy or rivalry had fueled the confrontation. As Thompson sat in custody, the investigation continued to solidify the case. Forensic reports confirmed Mackenzie's blood on the knife, and Thompson's DNA was present on the handle, strengthening the link. The autopsy of Mackenzie Anderson revealed she suffered 78 stab wounds inflicted in less than 3 minutes. On March 27, 2022, Thompson was formally charged with murder, breaching an AVO, and related offenses tied to the events of that night. The murder charge was anchored by compelling evidence: the knife fragments bearing Mackenzie's blood, the witness accounts of her screams, and Thompson's presence at the scene with a suspicious injury. Additional charges included intimidating behavior, reflecting his pattern of harassment in the weeks prior. The motive, while not explicitly stated by Thompson, emerged through the investigation's findings. Detectives and domestic violence experts consulted by Strikeforce Slant concluded that Thompson's actions were driven by a need to reassert control over Mackenzie, who had been trying to move forward with her life and protect her son. His history of assault and intimidation, combined with his relentless contact after prison, suggested a refusal to let her go. The presence of Mackenzie's male friend that night may have been a catalyst, intensifying Thompson's fixation. The charges against Thompson were a step toward justice, but they also highlighted the failures that allowed him to remain a threat. By early 2025, the case had reached a critical juncture in the Newcastle Supreme Court, where the pursuit of justice for the 21-year-old mother unfolded. Initially set for a 4-week trial starting April 7, 2025, the case took a dramatic turn when Tyrone Thompson, then 25, changed his plea. On April 1, 2025, in the New South Wales Supreme Court, he pleaded guilty to the domestic violence murder of Mackenzie Anderson, halting the need for a full trial. This plea came after years of denials, during which he had maintained his not guilty stance, even as evidence mounted against him. The guilty plea was a significant moment, sparing Mackenzie's family the pain of a protracted trial, but shifting the focus to the sentencing hearing, where the court would determine the consequences of his actions. The hearing, presided over by Justice Richard Weinstein, became a pivotal moment for all involved. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Brendan Queenan, presented a harrowing case. They argued that Thompson's actions on March 25, 2022, were a brutal culmination of a pattern of control and violence. Court documents detailed how Thompson, on parole for prior domestic violence offenses against Mackenzie, ignored an apprehended violence order and broke into her Mayfield apartment twice that night. Using 2 kitchen knives, he stabbed her 78 times in less than 3 minutes, an attack so ferocious that one knife snapped. The prosecution emphasized Mackenzie's vulnerability, noting her repeated attempts to seek safety through advocacy groups and her fear that Thompson would harm her after his release. The defense, representing Thompson, acknowledged the gravity of his actions but sought leniency by highlighting mitigating factors. They argued that Thompson's mental health issues and challenging background diminished his moral culpability. According to Newcastle Weekly, his legal team submitted that he was not psychotic at the time of the crime, but struggled with emotional instability, which contributed to the escalation. An apology letter from Thompson was tendered, in which he expressed regret, stating, "No words can undo the pain and devastation I caused to someone I genuinely loved." However, the prosecution challenged this, with Queenan noting, "There is some element of victim blaming," pointing to Thompson's claim that the relationship was very physical with us both at times. Justice Weinstein, wary of the letter's sincerity, remarked that it offered limited insight into true remorse. On May 1, 2025, Justice Weinstein delivered the sentence. Thompson was jailed for a maximum of 22 years and 6 months, with a non-parole period of 15 years and 6 months, making him eligible for parole in 2038. The judge described the attack as a frenzied act of such ferocity that it left Mackenzie's family shattered, noting their helplessness, despair, and anger. He acknowledged the aggravating factors, including Thompson's prior violence and Mackenzie's fear, but also considered his guilty plea and personal circumstances in setting the term. The sentence sparked immediate outrage from Mackenzie's family, particularly her mother, Tabitha Ackritt. Outside the Newcastle Supreme Court, she collapsed in tears, telling reporters, "Whilst this might be thought of as a good outcome for the courts, we are disgusted that this sentence is what they think the value of my daughter's life was worth." She called the sentence an insult to women globally and demanded an appeal. On May 14, 2025, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions announced it would appeal Thompson's sentence, arguing it was manifestly inadequate for the crime's severity. Tabitha welcomed the decision, stating, "This is the first hurdle to getting a sentence that is more in line with community and moral standards." The appeal, set for a 2-hour hearing in the Court of Criminal Appeal on August 8, 2025, aims to increase Thompson's jail time, with prosecutors citing the need to set a stronger precedent against domestic violence offenders. The case's current status leaves Thompson in prison, awaiting the appeal's outcome, while Mackenzie's family continues their advocacy. The appeal could reshape the sentence, but no verdict can undo the loss. For Mackenzie's son, now in the care of relatives and her loved ones, the fight is as much about honoring her memory as it is about ensuring others don't suffer the same fate. The question lingers: will the legal system deliver a punishment that reflects the true cost of Mackenzie's life, or will it fall short again? Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think the appeal will bring? Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep watching. Today, we're here to tell the story of Lauren Johansen, a 22-year-old nursing student from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, whose life was cut short far too soon. Lauren Johansen was born on October 30, 2001, in Mississippi, a state known for its tight-knit communities and Southern hospitality. By 2023, she was a dedicated nursing student at the University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg, a city of about 48,000 people in Forest County. Lauren was the kind of person who left a lasting impression on everyone she met. Her father, Dr. Lance Johansen, a local physician, often spoke of her compassion and determination. She was working toward a career in healthcare, driven by a desire to help others. Friends and family described her as kind-hearted, always ready with a smile, and deeply committed to her studies. Lauren balanced the demands of her nursing program, which included rigorous coursework and clinical rotations, with the everyday challenges of young adulthood. She lived in a home on South 11th Avenue, a quiet street in Hattiesburg, where she was surrounded by a support system of family and friends. To ensure her safety, Lauren's home was equipped with 11 security cameras, a precaution that reflected the concerns her family had about her well-being. At the heart of Lauren's story was her relationship with Bryson Rivers, a 23-year-old man from Mississippi. The two met sometime before 2023, and what began as a hopeful connection soon became a source of pain. According to statements from Lauren's father, shared in court records, their relationship was marked by troubling incidents. Lance Johansen described multiple occasions where Lauren faced difficulties with Rivers, though she often tried to move forward with her life. Abusive relationships often involve complex dynamics, making it hard for victims to break free. For Lauren, her kindness and trust may have kept her tied to Rivers longer than her family wished, despite their attempts to intervene. Despite these challenges, Lauren agreed to join Rivers for a trip to Nashville, Tennessee in early December 2023. The city, known for its vibrant music scene and bustling attractions, was a popular destination for a getaway. For Lauren and Rivers, the trip was meant to be a chance to spend time together, but it quickly took a dark turn. On December 11, 2023, Lauren and Rivers spent the day visiting some of Nashville's well-known spots. They started at the Frist Art Museum, a cultural hub in the heart of the city, where they likely explored exhibits and enjoyed the creative atmosphere. From there, they headed to Topgolf, a popular entertainment venue, for a casual outing. The day seemed ordinary, filled with activities typical of a young couple on a trip. Later that evening, they visited a local bar, mingling with others and soaking in Nashville's lively nightlife. But as the night progressed, an argument broke out between Lauren and Rivers. According to police reports, Rivers accused Lauren of inappropriate behavior with the bartender, a claim that sparked tension between them. The situation escalated as they left the bar. Rivers allegedly slapped and punched Lauren, took her phone, and drove her to a parking lot in Germantown, a Nashville suburb. There, he brutally beat her for about an hour, holding her forearm against her throat, causing her to nearly lose consciousness. Lauren recorded part of the assault on her phone, capturing her screams and struggles to breathe. Metro Nashville police, alerted by Rivers' mother and Lauren Johansen's family via a tracking app, found Lauren banging on the car window for help. The car's interior was covered in blood, and a handgun was found inside. Rivers was arrested and charged with 2 counts of especially aggravated kidnapping, 1 count of aggravated stalking, and 1 count of coercion of a witness. Lauren was taken to a nearby hospital, where she received treatment for her injuries. She spent 2 days recovering, a testament to the severity of the incident. The police relied heavily on physical evidence from the car and Lauren's injuries to build their case. Lauren's recorded audio from her phone, which captured parts of the altercation, also played a role in documenting what happened. For Lauren's family, the incident was a wake-up call. Lance Johansen, her father, took immediate action to bring Lauren back to Mississippi once she was released from the hospital. He wanted to keep her safe and away from Rivers, who remained in custody in Nashville's Davidson County Jail. The family hoped this would mark the end of Lauren's contact with Rivers, allowing her to focus on her studies and her future. Lauren returned to Hattiesburg, where she resumed her life as a nursing student, surrounded by her sister and friends. Her home on South 11th Avenue, equipped with 11 security cameras, was a place where she should have felt secure. The Nashville incident was a critical moment, exposing the dangers in Lauren's relationship with Rivers. It also brought her case into the legal system, where decisions made in the coming months would have far-reaching consequences. In the weeks after the incident, the case moved through Nashville's court system. By March 19, 2024, a preliminary hearing was held before Judge Cheryl Blackburn in Davidson County. The hearing was a critical step, determining whether there was enough evidence to proceed with the charges against Rivers. During this session, prosecutors presented audio evidence recorded on Lauren's phone during the Nashville incident, which captured parts of the altercation. The audio was reviewed in closed chambers to protect sensitive details, but its existence underscored the seriousness of the case. Lance Johansen testified at the hearing, providing insight into the impact of the incident on his daughter. "I sat in the courtroom in Nashville and told the judge that if they let him out, he was going to kill her," Lance Johansen said. He had assaulted her. This was probably the 5th or 6th time where they would get into a fight and he would beat her. We would get her away from him for a while, but he would find a way to weasel back in it. While Rivers remained in jail, his attempts to contact Lauren continued. Court records later revealed that he made phone calls from Davidson County Jail, trying to influence her statements about the December incident. These actions aligned with the charge of coercion of a witness, suggesting Rivers sought to control the narrative even from behind bars. Lauren, however, was back in Mississippi, trying to rebuild her life. Initially, she expressed reluctance to press charges, a common response in cases involving complex relationships. Despite her hesitation, Metro Nashville Police moved forward with the case, relying on physical evidence like the blood in the car and the handgun found at the scene, ensuring the charges stood independent of Lauren's wishes. As the legal process unfolded, a significant decision came in April 2024. Judge Cheryl Blackburn, overseeing the case, made a ruling on Rivers' bond, which had initially been set at $250,000, a high amount reflecting the severity of the charges. During a court session, the judge decided to reduce the bond to $150,000, a move that would have significant implications. The bond reduction came with strict conditions designed to ensure Lauren's safety and monitor Rivers' actions. These conditions required Rivers to be released to the custody of 2 bonding companies, Brooks Bail Bonding and On Time Bonding, and to wear a GPS ankle monitor to track his movements. Additionally, he was ordered to remain in Davidson County, Tennessee, and to have no contact with Lauren, either directly or indirectly. The bond conditions were meant to balance the need for public safety with Rivers' legal rights, but they relied heavily on proper execution by the court and the bonding companies. The legal proceedings from December 2023 to April 2024 marked a critical period in Lauren's story. The charges against Rivers, the evidence presented in court, and the bond reduction decisions set the stage for what would come next. On June 24, 2024, a significant error occurred in Nashville's Davidson County Criminal Court Clerk's office. Rivers was released from jail after posting the reduced bond, but the clerk's office failed to properly communicate the bond conditions to the jail or the bonding companies, Brooks Bail Bonding and On Time Bonding. The bond order specified that Rivers was not to be released after 4 p.m. to ensure he could be fitted with a GPS monitor by Tracking Solutions, which closed at that time, but this was not followed. Records show Rivers was let out of jail on Monday, June 24th at 4:05 p.m. As a result, Rivers left custody without the required GPS ankle monitor and without clear instructions to remain in Davidson County or avoid contact with Lauren. This clerical oversight, later documented in court proceedings, meant that no one was actively monitoring Rivers' movements. The system that was supposed to protect Lauren had faltered at a crucial moment. The Davidson County District Attorney's Office attempted to address the mistake. On Friday, June 28th, they left a voicemail for Lance Johansen, warning that Rivers had not reported to tracking solutions for a GPS monitor and could not be located. The voicemail, obtained by WLOX, stated, "This is Bailey calling from the District Attorney's Office in Nashville. Bryson Rivers was released from custody. He was supposed to report straight to a GPS company and be put on a GPS monitor, and he was not to leave Davidson County. But as soon as he was released, he did not report to that GPS monitoring company, and he has not been heard from. I wanted to make sure Lauren is safe." Lance Johansen did not hear the message until Monday, July 1st, leaving the family unaware of the immediate risk. With no monitor in place and no restrictions enforced, Rivers was free to leave Nashville and traveled back to Mississippi, where Lauren was living, violating the terms of his bond. Rivers' movements over the next few days were erratic. On Saturday, June 29, 2024, he briefly returned to Nashville around 4 p.m. and was fitted with a GPS ankle monitor by Freedom Monitoring, a different company from the court-ordered tracking solutions. However, no exclusion zones were set to restrict his travel or alert authorities if he approached Lauren, compounding the initial error. By July 1st, he was back in Mississippi, specifically in the Biloxi area, as later confirmed by GPS data. On July 2nd, his monitor's battery began failing around 10 a.m., and he stopped responding to messages from Freedom Monitoring. His last recorded location was on Beach Boulevard in Biloxi, far from Davidson County. During this period, Rivers made repeated attempts to contact Lauren. Court records later revealed he sent approximately 126 texts and calls to her phone between June 25th and July 2nd, 2024, though she did not respond. These attempts suggested he was focused on reaching her, despite the court's no-contact order. Lauren, meanwhile, continued her life in Hattiesburg, unaware that Rivers was no longer in custody or being monitored. Her home's security cameras and the presence of her sister and a male friend provided some reassurance, but the family had no reason to suspect Rivers was nearby. Lance Johansen, who had been vocal about his concerns in court, trusted that the legal system's conditions were being enforced, unaware of the breakdowns that had occurred. The failure to properly implement Rivers' bond conditions created a dangerous gap. The bonding companies, Brooks Bail Bonding and On-Time Bonding, were responsible for ensuring compliance, but the lack of clear communication from the clerk's office left them uninformed. Similarly, the incorrect assignment of the GPS monitor to Freedom Monitoring added to the confusion. The clerical error in Nashville, combined with the lack of proper monitoring, allowed Rivers to slip through the system's cracks. Rivers' unmonitored movements in late June and early July brought him closer to Lauren, setting the stage for a devastating outcome. On July 1st, he visited his mother's home in McHenry, Mississippi, a small community about 30 miles from Hattiesburg. That night, he arranged to be dropped off near Lauren's residence on South 11th Avenue. Around 2:15 a.m. on July 2nd, a friend left him a short distance from her home, and by 4 a.m., surveillance footage captured Rivers walking toward Lauren's house, fully clothed. The footage came from the security cameras installed at her property, though police later noted that 5 of the 11 cameras were missing when they searched the home. Inside the house, Lauren was not alone. Her younger sister and a male friend were present, providing a sense of normalcy. The friend later told investigators he saw Lauren alive between 4 and 6 a.m. that morning, suggesting she was still safe at that point. However, the situation changed rapidly. Surveillance footage showed Rivers leaving the house around 5:11 a.m., noticeably without a shirt, before briefly returning. By 5:51 a.m., he was recorded driving Lauren's car out of the driveway. He returned once more to pick up an item and then left again. That same day, July 2nd, 2024, Lauren's family grew concerned. Early Tuesday morning, Lance Johansen said he woke up around 4 a.m. and received a notification that his daughter's Life 360 tracker was turned off. Then, he received a call from his younger daughter, who was living with Lauren. She said that Lauren was not home, the front door was left open, and their security camera was destroyed. The family contacted Hattiesburg Police Department to file a missing person report. Here is what Father Lawrence said about the police's reaction when he reported his daughter missing. "When I got up there in the morning, I called to see what Hattiesburg police found overnight. There was no communication. They didn't do anything. We assumed they were going to track the vehicle and try to find her, but they never did it until Wednesday at 3 o'clock when I insisted they find out where the car was." Using OnStar, a vehicle tracking service, Hattiesburg police located Lauren's car on July 3, 2024, at Wolf River Cemetery in Pass Christian, a small town in Harrison County, Mississippi, about 70 miles from Hattiesburg. A Harrison County deputy, conducting a welfare check, approached the vehicle and discovered Lauren's body in the back, wrapped in sheets and trash bags. The discovery confirmed the family's worst fears. Rivers was seen fleeing into nearby woods, triggering a large-scale response from law enforcement. 8 agencies, involving 55 officers, conducted a 9-hour manhunt, culminating in Rivers' arrest around 11 p.m. that night. He was charged with first-degree murder, grand larceny auto, and tampering with evidence. During the manhunt, Rivers contacted his brother, making statements that later became part of the court record. These statements, reported by WLOX, provided insight into his mindset, though investigators relied primarily on physical evidence, including the surveillance footage, GPS data, and the condition of Lauren's car. Mississippi officials have stated that autopsy records, particularly for homicide cases, are not considered public record in the state, so no official autopsy results for Lauren Johansen have been released. However, her father, Lance Johansen, described her injuries based on his observations, noting that she was brutally beaten, with severe trauma to her face and head. The Harrison County Coroner's Office confirmed her death on July 2, 2024, with investigators determining the murder likely occurred in Forest County. The discovery of Lauren's body marked a tragic turning point, ending her family's hopes of bringing her home safely. The events of July 1st and 2nd exposed the devastating consequences of the legal system's earlier failures, leaving Lauren vulnerable despite the precautions taken by her and her family. On July 26, 2024, Rivers appeared in Forest County Justice Court before Judge Gay Polk Payton. The hearing focused on his charges: first-degree murder for Lauren's death, grand larceny auto for taking her car, and tampering with evidence for actions taken after the crime. Judge Polk Payton denied bond for the murder charge, ensuring Rivers remained in custody, but set $20,000 bonds for the lesser charges of grand larceny and tampering as a procedural matter. Lance Johansen, present in the courtroom, expressed relief that Rivers would stay behind bars, emphasizing the need for accountability. The hearing marked the first step in a long legal process, with the case moving toward a grand jury. The investigation into Rivers' release from Nashville gained traction in August 2024. On August 15th, a 6-judge panel in Davidson County, Tennessee, held an evidentiary hearing to examine the clerical error that allowed Rivers to leave jail without proper monitoring. The panel questioned representatives from Brooks Bail Bonding and On Time Bonding, the companies responsible for his bond, as well as Freedom Monitoring, which had incorrectly fitted his GPS monitor. Court records showed that the Davidson County Criminal Court Clerk's office failed to communicate the bond conditions, and the bonding companies did not ensure compliance. Lance Johansen, who attended the hearing, criticized the companies for their negligence, arguing they allowed Rivers to return to Mississippi unchecked. By February 2025, the case progressed significantly. On February 18, 2025, a Forest County grand jury indicted Rivers on 3 charges: capital murder, grand larceny auto, and tampering with physical evidence. The capital murder charge made the case eligible for the death penalty, reflecting the severity of the crime. 2 days later, on February 20, 2025, Rivers appeared before Judge Bob Helfrich in Forest County Circuit Court for his arraignment. He pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. In October 2024, a 6-judge panel in Davidson County ruled that 2 bonding companies made mistakes, but did not break any rules in Rivers' release in Nashville before he murdered his ex-girlfriend. The judges added that while mistakes were made, the alleged criminal actions lie with Rivers. Beyond the courtroom, Lance Johansen channeled his grief into advocacy. On June 23, 2025, he filed a $150 million wrongful death lawsuit against Brooks Bail Bonding, On-Time Bonding, their agents and insurers, alleging negligence in Rivers' release. The lawsuit, reported by WLOX, sought $50 million in compensatory damages and $100 million in punitive damages, aiming to hold the companies accountable for failing to enforce the bond conditions that allowed Rivers to reach Lauren. Lance Johansen also proposed Lauren's Law, a legislative effort to prevent those charged with violent domestic crimes from being released on bond until trial. Lauren's case highlighted critical flaws in how domestic violence cases are handled, from bond enforcement to victim protection. Her father's efforts, both in court and through advocacy, aimed to ensure her legacy would lead to change. The trial was scheduled for June 25, 2025, and as of July 2025, no verdict had been reached, with the case still pending. Thank you for joining us on Checkered Sky to honor Lauren Johansen's memory and share her story. We'll continue to follow this case and others, bringing you the truth with care and respect. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video. Today, we're heading to Chile, to the sun-scorched streets of Antofagasta, where a young woman's disappearance sent shockwaves through a tight-knit community. This is the story of Javiera Jiménez, a 23-year-old influencer whose vibrant life was cut short in a case that's equal parts heartbreaking and baffling. It was August 2022, and Antofagasta, a coastal city in northern Chile, buzzed with its usual rhythm. Javiera Jiménez, a rising social media star, was known for her infectious energy. At 23, she had a knack for connecting with people, both online and off. But on August 26, 2022, Javiera's bright light went dark. She vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of questions that would haunt her family, friends, and the authorities. That morning, Javiera told her family she was heading out for a trip to Calama, a mining town about 200 kilometers inland. By evening, when Javiera didn't check in, her family grew worried. Phone calls went unanswered. Her social media, usually buzzing with updates, stayed silent. Her mother, frantic, contacted friends, hoping someone had heard from her. No one had. As days passed, the case gained traction. Local news outlets picked up the story, and Javiera's followers flooded social media with hashtags, pleading for answers. The police report filed on August 26, 2022, marked the official start of the investigation. Javiera's family told authorities she'd left home that morning, picked up by Andres Sutar, her boyfriend of 6 months, for a trip to Calama. The purpose of the journey remained murky. Some said it was a casual outing. Others hinted at a possible business deal tied to Javiera's influencer work. The police, led by the Antofagasta branch of the Policía de Investigaciones, PDI, began reconstructing her final hours. They interviewed friends who saw her that morning, noting she seemed her usual self, cheerful but perhaps a bit distracted. One friend recalled Javiera mentioning she was excited about the trip, but didn't elaborate on why. The police also spoke to neighbors and local vendors, hoping someone had seen her or Sutar before they left the city. A few reported spotting a white pickup truck, later confirmed as Sutar's, near the house where Javiera was staying. The investigation quickly zeroed in on Andres Sutar, the last person seen with Javiera. Known as Wata in some circles, Sutar was a 23-year-old from Calama with no steady job, a detail that raised eyebrows among Javiera's family. Gladys, Javiera's mother in particular, had never warmed to him, sensing something off about his demeanor. The police brought Sutar in for questioning on August 27th, just a day after Javiera's disappearance. His story was shaky from the start. He claimed he and Javiera had driven toward Calama in his truck, but along the way, a suitcase fell off the vehicle. According to Sutar, this sparked an argument. He said he left Javiera on the side of the road near the city's entrance while he went back to retrieve the bag. When he returned, he insisted she was gone. He told police he assumed she'd wandered off or caught a ride elsewhere. His account struck investigators as odd. Why would he leave her alone in such a remote area? And why didn't he call her immediately? Sutar's testimony didn't sit right with Gladys either. In an interview with journalists, she expressed skepticism, pointing out that Sutar hadn't reached out to her or anyone else in the family to ask about Javiera's whereabouts. He didn't even seem worried, she later said, her voice heavy with distrust. The police pressed Sutar for more details, but he stuck to his story, offering little else. They noted his behavior, calm, almost detached, with no visible signs of distress. This raised red flags, prompting investigators to dig deeper into his background. They learned Sutar had ties to a local group involved in copper theft, a lucrative crime in Chile's mining-heavy north. While there was no evidence linking Javiera directly to these activities, the connection added a layer of complexity to the case. Could her disappearance be tied to Sutar's shady associates? The search for Javiera was exhaustive. The PDI, alongside Carabineros, Chile's national police, combed the route between Antofagasta and Calama, a stretch of Highway B400 that cuts through the desolate Atacama Desert. Teams scoured the sandy terrain, checking roadside stops, abandoned buildings, and even old mining sites, mindful of the region's history of bodies hidden in its vast wilderness. Helicopters buzzed overhead, scanning for anything out of place, a piece of clothing, a tire track, anything. Volunteers from Antofagasta joined the effort, organized by Javiera's family and fueled by her followers' social media campaigns. Posters with her photo appeared all over the city, from bus stops to street stalls. Witness interviews painted a picture of Javiera's final moments, but offered few breakthroughs. A gas station attendant on the outskirts of Antofagasta recalled seeing a white truck matching Sutar's description around midday on August 26th. He couldn't confirm if Javiera was inside, but the timing lined up. Another witness, a truck driver on the B400, reported seeing a couple arguing near a vehicle that day, though he couldn't identify them. Javiera's phone, a critical piece of evidence, was off by the afternoon of August 26th, and its last ping placed it somewhere along the highway. Sutar's phone, however, showed movement back toward Antofagasta, after the alleged suitcase incident, contradicting his claim of a quick return. As weeks passed, the investigation took a darker turn. On September 2, 2022, the PDI detained Sutar again, this time for obstruction of justice. They'd found inconsistencies in his story, and he'd been evasive when asked to provide his phone for forensic analysis. When they finally seized it, they discovered messages and audio files linking him to a copper theft ring led by a man named Jonathan Olav. The police suspected Sutar was withholding information about Javiera to protect himself or others. He was released with conditions, bi-weekly check-ins at the PDI station, and a ban on leaving Chile. But on September 18, 2022, he vanished. The PDI later confirmed he'd fled to Bolivia, crossing the border illegally. Interpol issued a red notice, and the hunt for Sutar became international. His flight only deepened suspicions. Why run if he had nothing to hide? Gladys and her family kept the pressure on, organizing vigils and speaking to the media. In October 2022, she told reporters, "I don't believe his story. He knows more than he's saying." The police shared her frustration. They interviewed members of Sutar's circle, including his mother, who claimed ignorance of his whereabouts. They also looked into Javiera's relationships, asking friends if she'd mentioned any threats or conflicts. Most said she hadn't, though some noted she'd been less open about her life in the months leading up to her disappearance. Was she hiding something, or was she simply caught in someone else's web? The copper theft connection loomed large, with investigators wondering if Javiera had stumbled onto something dangerous. The community's hope began to fade as months passed with no sign of Javiera. The desert, vast and unforgiving, seemed to have swallowed her whole. Yet, the police weren't giving up. They followed leads to Bolivia, where Sutar was reportedly hiding in Santa Cruz. Tips came from locals and even social media, where Gladys had posted about her daughter's case, urging anyone with information to come forward. The PDI worked with Bolivian authorities, piecing together Sutar's movements. Every clue pointed back to that fateful day on the B400 and the man who'd driven away, leaving Javiera behind. What had really happened out there, and what was Sutar running from? By November 2022, the search had expanded beyond the Antofagasta-Calama highway, with teams combing remote areas and revisiting leads. The PDI leaned heavily on forensic evidence, analyzing data from Sutar's phone, which showed unusual activity after his supposed return to retrieve the suitcase. They also reviewed footage from several surveillance cameras installed along Highway B400 in hopes of locating his white pickup truck. A tip from a local miner, who'd noticed disturbed earth near an old mining road, gave investigators a new focus. The miner, interviewed on November 12, 2022, mentioned seeing tire tracks and what looked like a freshly dug patch off a dirt road near Sierra Gorda, about 60 kilometers from Calama. It wasn't much, but in a case with so few leads, it was enough to act on. On November 15, 2022, the PDI, joined by forensic teams and cadaver dogs, descended on the site. The area was desolate, marked by rocky outcrops and abandoned mining equipment, a place where the desert could easily conceal its secrets. After hours of careful digging, the team uncovered something grim: human remains buried in a shallow grave about a meter deep. The remains were carefully exhumed, revealing clothing fragments that matched descriptions of what Javiera was wearing on August 26th: a black top and jeans. A small, distinctive bracelet, one her mother later confirmed as Javiera's, was found nearby. The scene was meticulously documented, with soil samples and nearby debris collected for analysis. The date marked a turning point. 81 days had passed since Javiera's disappearance. The remains were transported to the Servicio Médico Legal in Antofagasta, for identification and autopsy. The process was painstaking, given the state of decomposition after nearly 3 months in the desert. DNA testing, conducted with samples from Gladys, confirmed the remains were Javiera's on November 20th, 2022. The news crushed her family, who'd clung to fading hopes of finding her alive. Gladys described the moment as a knife to the heart, yet she vowed to keep pushing for justice. The discovery shifted the investigation from a missing persons case to a homicide inquiry, with the PDI now focused on piecing together how Javiera ended up in that grave. The autopsy, completed on November 22, 2022, provided critical insights. Forensic experts found evidence of severe trauma, a gunshot wound to the chest, with the bullet still lodged in her rib cage. The cause of death was determined to be homicide, resulting from massive internal bleeding due to the gunshot. The report noted no signs of prolonged struggle, suggesting the act was swift. Additional findings included traces of sand and mineral dust in her clothing, consistent with the Sierra Gorda site, indicating she was likely killed and buried there shortly after her disappearance. The absence of defensive wounds raised questions. Had she been caught off guard? The autopsy also revealed traces of blood in her hair, though no skull fractures, hinting at possible minor blunt force trauma before the fatal shot. Investigators revisited Sutar's truck, which had been impounded after his flight to Bolivia. Forensic analysis, conducted in early December 2022, uncovered traces of blood in the truck bed, confirmed through DNA testing to be Javiera's. The amount was significant, suggesting she'd been transported after the injury. The PDI theorized that Sutar had driven her body to the burial site, a hypothesis supported by tire tracks matching his vehicle found near the grave. They also analyzed soil samples from the truck's undercarriage, which matched the mineral composition of the Sierra Gorda area. This forensic link was a breakthrough, tying the vehicle directly to the crime scene. The discovery sparked renewed urgency. The PDI intensified their search for Sutar, coordinating with Bolivian authorities through Interpol. They also re-interviewed key witnesses, including friends who'd seen Javiera and Sutar together on August 26th. One friend recalled a tense exchange between the couple days before, hinting at relationship strain. The police explored whether this tension was linked to Sutar's ties to a copper theft ring, led by Jonathan Olav, a figure who'd emerged in earlier investigations. Messages on Sutar's phone, extracted before his flight, suggested he'd been furious after learning of a possible romantic connection between Javiera and Olav. Was this a motive? The PDI kept this angle open but focused on hard evidence, avoiding speculation. The community's response was visceral. Vigils sprang up across Antofagasta, with hundreds gathering to mourn Javiera. The PDI faced pressure to deliver answers, especially as Gladys became a vocal advocate, appearing on local news to demand accountability. The discovery site, now cordoned off, became a focal point for investigators, who continued searching for additional evidence, perhaps a weapon or more personal items. The desert, though, was unforgiving, and wind had erased much of the surface evidence. On January 4, 2024, after nearly 16 months on the run, Bolivian police apprehended Sutar in Santa Cruz's Barrio Autonomia. The arrest, announced by Bolivia's Minister of Government, Eduardo del Castillo, was a breakthrough sparked by a tip from social media, where Gladys had relentlessly shared appeals for information. Sutar was extradited to Chile on January 5, 2024. His biography painted a picture of a troubled young man. Born in 1999 in Calama, a mining hub 200 kilometers from Antofagasta, Andrés Sutar Araya, known as Wata, grew up in a region where copper theft was a lucrative underworld trade. Court records revealed Sutar's involvement in 2 violent heists in 2022, one in May, where he and 5 others, armed with military-style gear and firearms, stole 60 million Chilean pesos worth of copper cathodes from a Ferrocarriles Antofagasta, Bolivia train, and another in July, targeting a truck on Ruta Cinco Norte with 250 million Chilean pesos in copper. The total amount of damage amounted to approximately 350,000 United States dollars. These crimes demonstrated his willingness to use violence, as he and his crew beat and restrained workers during the robberies. Sutar's connection to Javiera wasn't just romantic, it was complicated. Their 6-month relationship, starting in early 2022, had been marked by tension, especially after Javiera learned of his criminal activities. Another layer emerged: Sutar's alleged attack on Olav, leaving him paraplegic, reportedly stemmed from jealousy over a rumored affair with Javiera. After his extradition, Sutar appeared in court on January 6, 2024. The court charged him with 2 counts of robbery with violence and the homicide of Javiera Jiménez. During the hearing, Sutar's demeanor was described as defiant, with Gladys noting his lack of remorse. His statements, however, were a bombshell. Sutar admitted to burying Javiera's body in the desert, but claimed her death was accidental and that he had no direct role in it. He provided the exact coordinates of the Sierra Gorda site where her remains were found, a move his lawyer, Victor Contreras, called a substantial collaboration to seek leniency. Contreras, known for defending narcos, argued Sutar wasn't the killer and hinted at third-party involvement, though he offered no evidence. In police interrogations, Sutar stuck to his narrative of an accidental death. He reiterated his earlier story. An argument over a fallen suitcase led him to leave Javiera on the B400 highway, and when he returned, she was dead. He claimed to have panicked, burying her to avoid suspicion, especially given his phone's incriminating messages about copper theft. The PDI, skeptical, pressed him on the gunshot wound and the blood in his truck. Sutar's responses were vague, insisting he didn't shoot her and suggesting an unknown assailant might have intervened. Gladys, devastated but resolute, dismissed Sutar's story as a lie. She pointed to the overwhelming evidence. He shot her, buried her, and ran. He knows exactly what he did. The prosecution shared her view, arguing Sutar's flight to Bolivia and his history of violence made his accidental death claim implausible. The court agreed, ordering 90 days of preventive detention for danger of flight and public safety. On November 4, 2024, Sutar was convicted of 2 counts of robbery with violence and intimidation, stemming from a May 2022 train heist and a July 2022 truck robbery, both targeting copper cathodes. The court sentenced him to 16 years of effective prison time, a ruling upheld by the Corte Suprema in January 2025. The evidence was overwhelming. Messages on Sutar's phone, including boasts to Javiera about the heists, and photos of him with weapons and cash, sealed his fate. The court also convicted his accomplice, Jonathan Olave, to 20 years, and 5 others to 8 to 11 years, totaling 91 years for the gang. As of July 2025, Sutar's homicide case remains under investigation, with no trial date set. The delay has frustrated Gladys, who said in an interview in December 2024, "Every day without a verdict is another day without peace." The PDI continues analyzing Sutar's phone, seeking additional messages or calls that might clarify the events of August 26, 2022. They're also exploring whether Olav's crew played a role, though no evidence has surfaced to support Contreras' third-party theory. The impact on Javiera's family is immeasurable. The funeral on May 31, 2024, drew a crowd mourning the loss of Antofagasta's bright star. Financially strained, the family relies on community support to sustain their fight. Meanwhile, Sutar's appeal in the copper theft case, filed in December 2024, was rejected, ensuring he remains behind bars. But the question of Javiera's justice lingers. Share your thoughts below. What do you make of Sutar's claims, and will the truth ever be fully known? Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Checkered Sky channel, where we dive into true crime stories. On October 31st, 2022, the body of 27-year-old Ariadna López was found abandoned along a road in Morelos, Mexico. At first, it seemed like just another tragic accident, or maybe another case that would get swept under the rug in a country where impunity runs deep. Authorities claimed there were no signs of violence, blaming alcohol for her death. But something didn't feel right. Who was Ariadna? Why had she disappeared just hours earlier in Mexico City after meeting up with friends? And why did the official story unravel so quickly? What followed exposed major flaws in the system. A controversial autopsy, a second forensic report that told a completely different story, and two state governments pointing fingers at each other. The case sparked national outrage. It wasn't just about one woman anymore, it was about the truth, the silence, and what happens when justice is pushed aside. Ariadna Fernanda López was 27 when she disappeared, and long before her tragic death, she had already experienced a life full of both dreams and struggles. She grew up in working-class neighborhoods in eastern Mexico City, the youngest of 5 siblings. Everyone called her Ari. Her mother had passed away from cancer a few years earlier, and her relationships with her father and older half-siblings had started to fall apart. Eventually, she found herself without a stable home and was effectively forced out by her family. Despite everything, her friends described her as always cheerful, full of life, always dancing, singing, and loving classic rock and comedy. She had a 7-year-old son whom she adored, and she dreamed of moving with him to the Caribbean city of Cancun for a better life. To support her son, Ariadna worked various jobs in Mexico City, first as a beautician, then as a waitress at 60s Bar and Rock in the Condesa neighborhood. There, she met a wide range of people, including some with wealth and influence. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she lost her restaurant job, but later started a small manicure business. It was more than just a job. It was her way of maintaining her independence and financial stability. For Ariadna, the business was a statement, a reflection of her determination to stand on her own terms. With the skills she had built and a growing list of contacts, she made the salon work. It provided a steady income and gave her a new sense of purpose. Around this time, someone new entered her life, a man she quickly formed a connection with. Their relationship gave her comfort and emotional stability, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Between caring for her son, running her business, and nurturing this new bond, Ariadna kept her life moving forward. It wasn't easy, but she made it work, finding joy in the rhythm of her everyday life. Things were starting to come together, but just as things were looking up, trouble was already creeping in. Ariadna met Vanessa Flores through some mutual friends. They first crossed paths at a party Ariadna went to with people from her circle. Vanessa immediately stood out. She was young, magnetic, and quick to connect with people. At first glance, she was the type who made an impact right away, warm, easygoing, and friendly. But for those who got to know her better, there was more to her. Beneath the surface, she was impulsive, unpredictable, and not always the most trustworthy. Then there was Rautel Astudillo. In his mid-30s, Rautel was often seen hanging around Vanessa. He was a businessman with money and a taste for the good life, always the host. always in control. His lifestyle was flashy, and he had a way of making people pay attention. Young women were drawn to him, lured by his wealth, connections, and the promise of something better. But there was always something off about him. People talked about his ties to powerful figures, even some shady characters, though no one had real proof. He never discussed his business openly, and if anyone got too curious, he quickly changed the subject. He had this calm, controlled vibe that could either put you at ease or leave you unsettled. Together, Vanessa and Rautel made up a couple that people found fascinating and confusing. For Ariadna, getting to know them would turn out to be the start of a story no one could have predicted, and one that would end in total silence. Though Ariadna was smart, grounded, and fiercely independent, she didn't immediately realize how different her new friends were from the people she was used to. Vanessa, always eager to make an impression, liked to talk about her connections, especially her link to Rautel. She painted him as someone who could solve any problem, someone with influence that went far beyond what you could see on the surface. Over time, Ariadna found herself spending more time with both of them. Vanessa, in particular, seemed drawn to her. She went out of her way to win Ariadna's trust, offering compliments, opportunities, and a sense of belonging in a world that felt new and exciting. Rautel, who'd heard about Ariadna through Vanessa, was quick to show interest. When they first met, he was warm, polished, and attentive. He asked questions, listened closely, and spoke with confidence. He had a way of making people feel important, and Ariadna wasn't immune to his charm. But under that smooth exterior, there was something more complicated. Vanessa played a big role in bringing them closer. She regularly invited Ariadna to events where Rautel would be there. Small gatherings, dinners, parties. It all felt casual, familiar. There was laughter, music, conversation. Everything felt easy. Slowly, Ariadna started to feel like she fit in with that crowd. Still, not everyone was sold on it. Some of her close friends quietly expressed their concerns. They warned her to be careful, saying that Vanessa and Rautel weren't exactly who they seemed to be. There were whispers about Rautel's shady reputation and Vanessa's unpredictable nature, but Ariadna didn't see it as a threat, just idle gossip. She saw her growing friendship with Vanessa as a welcome change, a way to step away from the stress of motherhood and business. Rautel's gestures, his generosity, his open invitations felt thoughtful, not manipulative. To her, this new world seemed exciting, maybe even empowering. But underneath it all, something much darker was starting to take shape. Vanessa had become more persistent. Constant texts, spontaneous calls, and frequent invitations to grab drinks or dinner. What Ariadna didn't realize was that she was being pulled deeper into their world. On October 30th, 2022, Vanessa invited her out for what sounded like a casual evening. Dinner with friends, she said, just something low-key at Fisher's, a trendy restaurant in downtown Mexico City. Ariadna agreed. It seemed harmless. At 5:55 p.m., a few minutes before arriving at the restaurant to meet with Rautel and Vanessa, she posted a peculiar phrase that still remains on her Facebook account. "Are you going to miss me?" An uncomfortable mockery of fate that filled with comments and farewells from all who knew her. The group gathered later that evening. The mood at the table was lively. Cocktails flowed, small plates were passed around, and Rautel, as usual, was the center of attention. Later that night, the group decided on a spontaneous change of plans. They would continue the evening at Rautel's place. The idea came from Rautel himself, with Vanessa enthusiastically backing it up. A more private setting, she said, would be more relaxed. At first, Ariadna seemed hesitant, but Vanessa gently persuaded her. Eventually, she agreed. The rest of the group followed, piling into Rautel's car for the short drive. His apartment in the Roma Sur neighborhood was a reflection of his wealth, an upscale residence in a secure building equipped with high walls, controlled access, and surveillance cameras. Friends left the apartment half an hour later, around 7:45 p.m. 10 minutes later, at 7:55 p.m., Ariadna's last WhatsApp activity was recorded. Nearly 2 days later, on November 1, 2022, news began to spread across Morelos. Two cyclists, out early on a rural road, came across something deeply disturbing: the body of a woman left on the side of the road. The location was remote, far from highways or neighborhoods. Desolate, silent. She was fully clothed, but her clothes were torn and soiled. Bruises and dark marks covered her limbs and torso, clear signs that she had been through a violent struggle. The cyclists immediately contacted the police and took photos to document what they had found, hoping they might help with identification later. Officers arrived several hours later, quickly closing off the area. Tire tracks ran through the dirt. Drag marks suggested the body had been moved. Her injuries were obvious, but there were no stab wounds, no gunshots, nothing that would explain her death. No ID, no phone, no purse. She was a stranger, found in a forgotten place. For now, no one knew who she was. Within hours, images of the body started circulating online, sparking intense discussion across social media. Among those who saw them were Ariadna's friends and family, who had been desperately searching for her since she was last seen at Rautel's house. Her brother, Omar, recognized the tattoos. Fearing the worst, he filed a missing persons report and told the police that the woman found in Morelos might be his sister. Around the same time, state authorities in Morelos began their own investigation, but the initial handling of the case sparked sharp criticism. Witnesses and media reports later revealed that key crime scene protocols had been ignored. Evidence wasn't properly collected, and some traces were poorly documented. These lapses raised serious questions about the professionalism and possible motives of the local police. When Ariadna's family arrived to identify the body, their worst fears were confirmed. Omar recognized her instantly, pointing to the tattoo on her shoulder that honored their late mother. The shock was overwhelming, made worse by the visible state of her body. Bruises covered her arms and face, clear signs of violence. However, the police statements at the time were vague, offering no clear explanation. To the family, it felt evasive. They demanded a thorough and transparent investigation, and soon they were publicly calling for justice. That same day, relatives and friends turned to social media to spread Ariadna's story. What started as a small online effort quickly snowballed, gathering thousands of voices. Despite the mounting public pressure, the Morelos police initially suggested her death could have been accidental, pending a full forensic report. This only deepened suspicions, particularly the fear that someone with influence might be trying to control the narrative. Investigators soon reached out to the last two people known to have been with Ariadna, Rautel and Vanessa. Their statements shaped the first official theory of events. According to Rautel, Ariadna decided to leave his apartment in the Roma Sur neighborhood after the party, calling a taxi on her own. He claimed she seemed a little upset but showed no signs of serious distress. He said he walked her to the door of the secure building and watched her leave. Vanessa backed up his version, adding that Ariadna hadn't mentioned where she was headed. But cracks in their story started to appear almost immediately. The first problem: there was no evidence that a taxi had picked her up. Although investigators confirmed that several taxis had been ordered in the area that night, none of the drivers reported picking up Ariadna. The second issue: Vanessa's story kept changing. Initially, She insisted that Ariadna had left alone. Later, she added that the two had argued earlier in the night, which might have upset her. Ariadna's friends also told police that Vanessa had contacted them, hinting that Ariadna might have harmed herself, pointing to the cryptic social media post she had made just hours before disappearing. At first, Ariadna's cryptic post was dismissed by her family and close friends as a poorly timed joke, but investigators began to see it differently. Perhaps it reflected her true state of mind that night. Adding to the concern was Vanessa's increasingly strange behavior. Messages she sent to Ariadna's friends seemed calculated, downplaying the situation and steering conversations away from the details. In one message, she even admitted she was worried about being suspected, though she offered no explanation. To investigators, this raised red flags. It seemed possible she was holding back something important. In the early stages of the investigation, there was little clarity. The circumstances of Ariadna's death remained unclear until new evidence began to surface, thanks to the combined efforts of law enforcement and independent forensic experts. 2 autopsies, along with recovered surveillance footage and text messages from the suspects' phones, started telling a different story. The first autopsy, conducted in Morelos, concluded that Ariadna had died from asphyxiation due to bronchial aspiration. The report suggested that food and alcohol in her airways might have caused her death, but her family immediately pushed back. They pointed to the visible bruises on her arms, legs, and face, marks the original report barely acknowledged. The turning point in the investigation came when Ariadna's body was transferred to Mexico City for a second independent autopsy. The family had demanded it, refusing to accept the Morelos prosecutor's initial claim that she had died from choking on her own vomit after a night of drinking. The new forensic team's findings revealed a completely different story. The examination showed multiple blunt force injuries, including significant trauma to her head, injuries that could not have been caused by an accident. Dark bruises and contusions were found on her face, arms, and legs, many of which appeared to be defensive wounds, suggesting she had tried to protect herself during an attack. These marks weren't from a fall or a medical episode. They were signs of violence. The second autopsy concluded that Ariadna's death was the result of a violent assault, not intoxication. This key finding completely shattered the initial story presented by Morelos authorities and reclassified the case as a homicide, one that prosecutors would soon classify as a femicide under Mexican law. From that point on, there was no going back. The narrative of an accidental death was replaced by undeniable evidence of brutality. For the first time, Ariadna's family could point to solid proof that what happened to her wasn't a tragic accident, but a crime that demanded justice. Then came one of the most critical breakthroughs: surveillance footage from the parking garage of Rautel's apartment building. In one clip, recorded the morning after the gathering, Rautel is seen carrying Ariadna's lifeless body to his car. Another angle shows him placing her inside the vehicle before driving away from the building. This was no longer a matter of speculation. The investigation now had a visual timeline, one that would unravel the story Rautel and Vanessa had been telling from the start. The surveillance footage became a game changer, irrefutable proof connecting Rautel to the removal and concealment of Ariadna's body. When investigators seized the phones of both Rautel and Vanessa, the digital trail revealed even more. Text messages between them showed that they were actively working to align their stories for the police and come up with explanations for Ariadna's friends. Vanessa expressed her anxiety about the pressure coming from the victim's family, while Rautel reassured her, saying, "Everything is under control." In one exchange, he even gave her step-by-step advice on how to answer questions without raising suspicion. Meanwhile, in her conversations with Ariadna's friends, Vanessa repeatedly pushed a narrative that Ariadna had been in a fragile emotional state, suggesting, without any proof, that she might have harmed herself. She said that Ariadna had been fighting with her roommate and didn't want to return home, then mentioned that it was possible that her phone had simply run out of battery. This claim was in sharp contrast to what Ariadna's friends told investigators. They described her as upbeat, social, and full of plans for the future, someone who showed no signs of despair or self-harm. On November 3rd, the couple attended Ariadna's wake. Routel spoke to the press and offered a version of events that the authorities later disproved. That night, Vanessa wrote to her boyfriend to tell him that they needed a video or something to prove that Ariadna left the building alive, because words alone won't do any good. They then prepared a message to post on social media, which included a photo of them with Vanessa. By this point, the evidence was overwhelming. During a search of the apartment, investigators found traces of Ariadna's blood. The second autopsy, the surveillance footage, and the recovered text messages all pointed in the same direction. Ariadna's death was not an accident, and she had not simply walked away from Routel's house. She had been the victim of violence, and her body had been deliberately hidden. These findings became the cornerstone of the criminal case against both suspects. Vanessa was the first to be taken into custody. Her arrest came under the intense spotlight of public attention, with media cameras capturing every moment. During her initial interrogation, Vanessa insisted that she had no role in Ariadna's death. She claimed she had gone to bed early the night of the incident and was unaware of anything that happened afterward. She later tried to blame the gaps in her memory on inebriation. But when investigators compared her account to phone records, surveillance footage, and witness statements, contradictions started to emerge. Contradictions too glaring to ignore. Phone records told a completely different story than the one Vanessa had been telling. Messages revealed that she was fully aware of what had happened that night and had been in contact with Routel about the details. Investigators also found that she had deleted photos, messages, and other data that could have served as crucial evidence, an intentional attempt to erase any trace of her involvement in covering up the crime. As the pressure mounted, Routel made his move. With his attorneys by his side, he turned himself in to the authorities. Standing before cameras, he maintained his innocence. He claimed he had never harmed Ariadna, but admitted to hiding her body, out of fear, he said, of being falsely accused. According to his version, he had found her unresponsive in his apartment the morning after the gathering. Believing she was already dead, he decided to move her body to avoid suspicion. But his story quickly fell apart. The second autopsy left no room for doubt. Ariadna's death had been violent, directly contradicting his claim of finding her lifeless without explanation. Surveillance footage showed him carrying her body in a deliberate and concealed manner, without calling for help or contacting authorities. And his text messages with Vanessa revealed a coordinated effort to fabricate a story that didn't match the evidence or the truth. As the investigation deepened, troubling allegations began to surface, suggesting a possible connection between Routel and officials in the Morelos prosecutor's office. The first autopsy, carried out in Morelos, had notably failed to mention injuries that clearly pointed to violence. Activists and Ariadna's family accused the prosecutor of protecting Routel to shield him from legal consequences. The investigation of the authorities points to a network of companies owned by him and his family. The accused has 2 companies to his name. The first is a parcel and courier company, and the second is private security. The parents own multiple companies, among other things, selling computer equipment, polyurethane belts for cars, office furniture, and car washes. One of his brothers is a lawyer, and the other works for an airline. Almost all of them live in well-off neighborhoods in Cuernavaca, the capital of Morelos. Public anger grew, and Mexico City officials announced they would review the actions of the Morelos prosecutor. Internal Affairs launched an inquiry into potential misconduct. The case quickly captured nationwide attention, becoming a glaring example of deeper flaws within the justice system and highlighting how public pressure can push a stalled investigation forward. As interrogations continued and new evidence was analyzed, it became increasingly clear that at least one of the suspects was withholding key information about what happened that night. Yet, neither Vanessa nor Rautel took direct responsibility. Their statements were more about defending themselves and justifying their actions than acknowledging the truth. Step by step, investigators pieced together a clearer story from conflicting witness accounts, digital records, and psychological profiles of the suspects. The evening had started off innocently enough, at a busy restaurant in the heart of Mexico City. Ariadna joined Vanessa and Rautel, along with several mutual friends, for dinner and drinks. When dinner came to an end, the group moved to Rautel's apartment in the Roma Sur neighborhood. Vanessa and Rautel took on the role of hosts, but onlookers noticed an underlying strain between them. Vanessa, in particular, made several pointed remarks toward Ariadna. Ariadna remained calm, avoiding escalation. Friends left the apartment half an hour later, around 7:45 p.m. The next day, on October 31st, at 10:27 a.m., Rautel's chauffeur is seen arriving at the site, dropping off the vehicle and leaving a few minutes later. Half an hour later, Rautel, the alleged killer, is seen carrying her body out of the building and into the SUV. The last security camera images show Rautel leaving the site and heading to Tepoztlan, where Ariadna's body would later be found. Although the full details of the confrontation remain unclear, investigators believe Vanessa accused Ariadna of drawing too much of Rautel's attention. Messages recovered from both suspects' phones confirmed that they later discussed the tense exchanges from that night. According to the investigation, Vanessa, now heavily intoxicated, began acting aggressively. It was during this time that something happened. Something that left Ariadna with fatal injuries. The reconstruction of events pointed to Vanessa's jealousy, exacerbated by alcohol and emotional instability, as a central factor in the tragedy. Rautel's subsequent actions, which seemed aimed at hiding the truth, only made things worse and ensured the outcome would be even more devastating. The start of the first court hearings was an important step toward bringing those responsible to justice. Despite resistance from some officials, the family, supported by their legal team, fought for transparency. From the very start, the proceedings focused on the actions of Rautel and Vanessa. Prosecutors presented a series of damaging pieces of evidence: surveillance footage, phone records, and recovered text messages. Together, these items pointed not just to the concealment of Ariadna's body, but also to potential involvement in the violence that led to her death. The defense tried to frame the incident as a tragic accident, but witness testimony and forensic analysis repeatedly contradicted that narrative. The court also delved into the question of motive. Those who knew Vanessa described her as volatile and quick-tempered, traits that were often exacerbated by alcohol. Rautel Astudillo, on the other hand, was portrayed as a man with a shady past and rumored connections to organized crime, raising further suspicions about his role in the events of that night. Although both defendants continued to deny responsibility, their stories didn't match up with the physical evidence, creating a widening gap between their claims and the established facts. What made this case even more significant was the fallout among officials. The Morelos Attorney General, Uriel Carmona Gondara, was accused of manipulating the investigation and suppressing evidence to protect the suspects, an action that triggered a federal corruption inquiry. He was arrested in August 2023, dismissed from his position in early 2025, and later cleared of the criminal charges in April 2024 due to legal technicalities. Despite the dismissal, public pressure played a key role in exposing what some saw as an institutional cover-up. A final verdict is still pending. Prosecutors have filed charges that could classify Ariadna's killing as femicide, an offense recognized under Mexican law as an extreme form of gender-based violence. If the court confirms this classification and secures a conviction, both defendants could face up to 70 years in prison.